Order, please. Order, please. Welcome back, everybody, to the spring session. And I know that everybody's going to be kind and generous to each other as we continue on through the entire spring session. So we'll begin with the daily routine. Presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Member for Bedford Basin.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table the 2022 annual report of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall read and table the message from His Honour, the Lieutenant Governor, transmitting the estimates of sums required for the service of the province for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024, for the consideration of this House. Table the budget and estimates books, table the government business plan, table the estimate resolutions, deliver my budget speech, and move that the estimates of sums required for the service of the province for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024, being supplied to be granted to Her Majesty, be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Supply. Mr. Speaker, the budget will be presented on Thursday, March 23rd.
Government notices of motion. Before we get into the introduction of bills, I recognize the Honourable Member for Colchester North on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction. I don't want to hear him.
They want to see his face.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction. In the gallery behind me is Jagger Laird. And Jagger is a young man from Colchester North who was very, I think, politically motivated, very interested in public service, is down here today to see how the legislature works. Jagger will graduate from CEC this fall and go on to Dalhousie University, and I'm kind of hoping that maybe I could talk him into, Jagger, if you don't mind, would you stand so that folks could know who I'm talking about?
The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just going to finish up by saying Jagger's a great guy, and like I say, he's going to Dal next year, and I'm kind of trying to encourage him to maybe put his name forward to become a page in this House. Anyway, thanks very much, and welcome, Jagger.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Eastern Passage on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction. I'd ask these members in the gallery to rise when I call out their names. I would like to welcome my partner, Mel Lucas, my wonderful constituency assistant, Lisa Rochon, our Eastern Passage PC Association President, Rhonda Vickers, good friends Mandy Raftis and Janice Moore, which is the backbone of my constituency and the greatest support anyone could ever ask. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Indeed, we welcome all visitors to the Speaker's Gallery and the Western Gallery as well. So please enjoy your day, and you'll see some interesting remarks coming forward, I'm sure. I recognize, no, the introduction of bills, sorry. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill called an Act to Reduce Administrative Barriers to the Provision of Health Care.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Reduce Administrative Barriers to the Provision of Health Care.
Bill 256, an act to reduce administrative barriers to the provision of health care.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future date. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I make an introduction before I introduce the bill, please?
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on the introduction.
I'd like to bring the attention of the House to the Western Gallery, where we are joined by Sydney Burho, advocate and resident of Nova Scotia. We have Maria Campbell, Director of Government Relations for Diabetes Canada, and who's a mom of a child with type 1 diabetes. We are also joined by Sherry Calder, Executive Director in Communications and PR, Marketing Communications, who is a resident of Nova Scotia, who is also very active in advocating on behalf of those with diabetes.
Once again, we welcome all visitors to the gallery today. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 197 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Health Services and Insurance Act, respecting glucose monitors. Thank you so much.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 197 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Health Services and Insurance Act, respecting glucose monitors.
Bill 257, an act to amend Chapter 197 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Health Services and Insurance Act, respecting glucose monitors.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. I recognize the Leader of the Official Opposition on another introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to bring the members' attention to the West Gallery, where we're joined by a longtime friend of mine, Valerie Haskett-Chugg from Antigonish County, who's here advocating on behalf of her community. Please be welcomed by the House.
Notices of motion. Oh. The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic. The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 401 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Residential Tenancies Act, respecting fixed-term leases. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 401 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Residential Tenancies Act, respecting fixed-term leases.
Bill 258, an act to amend Chapter 401 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Residential Tenancies Act, respecting fixed-term leases.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Good to see you again, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act, to reduce income tax.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act, to reduce income tax.
Bill 259, an act to amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act, to reduce income tax.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Halifax Shabukto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to present a bill entitled the Preventing Tenants from Unfair Evictions Act, an act to amend Chapter 401 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Residential Tenancies Act, respecting notices to quit.
The honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 401 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Residential Tenancies Act respecting notices to quit.
Bill 260, an act to amend Chapter 401 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Residential Tenancies Act respecting notices to quit.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill titled An Act to Amend Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Revenue Act, to suspend provincial motor fuel taxes.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Revenue Act, to suspend provincial motor fuel taxes.
Bill 261, an act to amend Chapter 17 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Revenue Act, to suspend provincial motive fuel taxes.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. With the unanimous consent of the House, will revert back to government notices of motion. Is it agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Minister of Labour, Skills and Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I read my notice of motion, I beg leave to make an introduction.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So visiting us today in your gallery, the Speaker's Gallery, to recognize Nowruz are members of the Iranian Society of Nova Scotia, Afghan community, and Ismaili community. I ask them to rise and accept the warm welcome of this House.
The Honourable Minister of Labour, Skills and Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nowruz is celebrated in many parts of the Middle and Central and South Asia, particularly among peoples influenced by Persian and Turkic civilization and culture, and whereas Nowruz means new day and marks a time of spiritual and physical renewal for those that celebrate it, and whereas for many people, the first day of spring marks the festival of a new year, or Nowruz, which is often celebrated with the major spring cleaning of their houses and by wearing new clothes for the new year. Therefore, it be resolved that members of the House of Assembly join me in recognizing Nowruz and the importance of this time of year for many Nova Scotians, and in wishing all of those who celebrate it a happy Nowruz filled with happiness, success, and good health. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Acadian Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction.
Please do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the gallery, we have this afternoon joining us members from my team from Acadian Affairs. Dans la galerie aujourd'hui, on a des membres de mon équipe du Bureau des Affaires acadiennes et de la francophonie. Marc Bannerman, Lise Poirier, Margot Poza, Gaston Saunier, et Laura Huhan-Wei. Staff from my department that are here today. I ask all members to welcome some of my team members to the legislature.
The Honourable Minister of Acadian Affairs.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Une date ultérieure, je demanderai l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que le 20 mars de chaque année est reconnu comme la Journée internationale de la francophonie pour célébrer les cultures, les traditions et la diversité des millions de francophones dans le monde. Et attendu que la langue française est présente en Nouvelle-Écosse depuis plus de 400 ans, soit depuis le premier établissement du peuple acadien à Port-Royal en 1605. Et attendu que, de nos jours, en Nouvelle-Écosse, environ 35 000 personnes ont le français comme la langue maternelle et plus de 100 000 personnes parlent français, y compris les Acadiens, les francophones et les nouveaux arrivants qui se sont installés en Nouvelle-Écosse. Par conséquent, qu'il est résolu que les membres de l'Assemblée législative se joignent à moi à tous les Acadiens et à tous les francophones de la Nouvelle-Écosse pour souligner la Journée internationale de la francophonie et pour rendre hommage à notre communauté florissante. Monsieur le Président, je demande l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas March 20th each year is recognized as International Francophonie Day, to honor the cultures, the traditions, and the diversity of the millions of French speakers around the world. And whereas Nova Scotia has been home to French language for more than 400 years, beginning with the first settlement of Acadians in Portrayal in 1605. And whereas today, about 35,000 Nova Scotians speak French as their first language, and over 100,000 Nova Scotians speak French, including Acadians, Francophones, and newcomers who make their home in Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly join me and all Acadians and Francophones in Nova Scotia in recognizing International Francophonie Day and in honoring our flourishing community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. Would all those in favor of the motion please show your consent by saying aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. Statements by members. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we gather for another sitting in this Legislative Assembly, I know each of us understands the privilege we feel to represent all Nova Scotians. I've traveled from one end of this province to the other, to hundreds of small towns and villages, meeting thousands of Nova Scotians who are enthusiastic about the future. Our province is growing. We are embracing new residents from around the world who are choosing to live in Nova Scotia because they see we are a welcoming, resourceful, and optimistic province. On this International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, I would like to welcome our new residents who have moved to our province and thank Nova Scotians who have welcomed them with generosity and kindness. Mr. Speaker, we are blessed to live in Nova Scotia. Thank you to each person who works hard to make this province a better place to live every day of our lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for King South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to ask members of the House to join me in a moment of silence following my statement. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to express my deepest condolences to the family and loved ones of Constable Travis Jordan and Constable Brett Ryan, who were tragically killed in the line of duty in Edmonton. We in the Valley are particularly saddened by the loss of Constable Travis Jordan, who hailed from Colebrook. The sacrifice and dedication of our law enforcement officers cannot be overstated. Every day they put their lives on the line to protect our communities and ensure our safety. The senseless deaths of Constable Travis Jordan and Constable Brent Ryan remind us of the dangers they face in their daily work. Let us take a moment to honor the memory of these courageous officers and to recognize the selflessness of all those who serve in law enforcement. We owe them a debt of gratitude that can never be fully repaid. To Travis's family and loved ones, please know that you are not alone. Our entire province stands with you, and we offer our deepest sympathies and support during this time of profound loss.
Thank you. Please be seated. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction.
Please do.
I will ask the members, the folks here who I mentioned, to rise when I say your name. We are honored to be joined today by many of the labor leaders in our province who bring with them, I'm sure, the tens and thousands of members across this province who are in many cases working on the front lines of education, healthcare, and other important public services. I'd like to welcome Danny Kavanagh, President of the Nova Scotian Federation of Labor, Chris Melanson, CUPE Nova Scotia Board Council of Unions President, Jackie Swain from SEIU, Mary Dan Johnson from CUPE, Sandra Mullen and Hugh Gillis, President and Vice President of the NSGEU, and Robert McKay and Nelson Scott from CUPE, who are here from Chignecto Central and Cape Breton, Victoria. Please join me in offering these folks a warm welcome to the House.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Pier. It's been a while. Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Pier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today is World Down Syndrome Day. My brother Adam and my cousin Barbara have Down syndrome, like 45,000 other Canadians. They have a kindness we can only wish to have, a joyful spirit that will brighten any room, and immeasurable love, Mr. Speaker. Adam and Barbara have taught us so much about love, compassion, acceptance, and a lot of patience, Mr. Speaker. Very independent people. Mr. Speaker, this year's theme is Be With Us, Not For Us. People with disabilities have the right to be treated fairly and have the same opportunities as everyone else, working with others to improve their lives. Mr. Speaker, moving away from the charity model of disability where people with disabilities were treated as objects and looked on with pity means doing things with and not for, making decisions with and not for. It means including organizations representing people with Down syndrome in policy-making and decision-making. Mr. Speaker, I leave you with this. My brother's superpowers is extra chromosome. What is yours?
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I read my member statement to recognize the International Day of Elimination of Racism, I beg leave to make an introduction.
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, visiting us today in your gallery, the Speaker's Gallery, is Dominique Awaiga. Dominique is a 15-year-old high school student. She's a spoken word poet, writer, activist, fashion designer, singer, and art illustrator. She's the founder of Dominique Creatives and the Afro-Indigenous Book Club, a book club she created to encourage young people to read books written by Black and Indigenous authors and to share the realities and experiences of Black and Indigenous Canadians. Dominique was CBC's Artist in Residence for the Michel Jean Foundation's Canadian Black Summit held in July 2022. She also enjoyed being a board member of the Nova Scotia Girls Institute for Resource and Learning. Dominique is a recipient of many awards, including the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. She's also a member of her high school Students' Council. As a spoken word poet for the past 5 years, Dominique loves to write and perform spoken word poems to bring attention to social justice issues. I ask her to rise and accept the warm welcome of the House.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to the House today to acknowledge March the 21st as the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. On this day in 1960, 69 people were tragically killed by police during their protests of apartheid laws in South Africa. 6 years later, this day was proclaimed to observe this terrible event. Nova Scotia is fortunate to have a population that is enriched by a kaleidoscope of different races and ethnicities, yet racial discrimination still exists, both here and throughout the world. The theme for 2023 focuses on the urgency of the need to combat racism. 75 years have passed since the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and racism has no place in our world. It must be condemned without reservation. Thank you to the Nova Scotians who work so diligently to combat racism, including those special guests who have joined us here today. Mr. Speaker, I ask that all members of this House join me in celebrating Nova Scotia's racially diverse population and thanking those who have fought and continue to fight for racial equality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today I want to recognize that it is World Down Syndrome Day. And I know we are joined in the Speaker's Gallery by many of our loved ones and their families. World Down Syndrome Day was created to recognize and celebrate the uniqueness of the triplication of the 21st chromosome, which causes Down syndrome. First, I'd like to celebrate those in Nova Scotia with Down syndrome who have added so much uniqueness, love, kindness, joy, energy, and positivity into our communities from one end of the province to the other and our families. I would also like to recognize the educators across the province who have worked so actively to build a more equitable and inclusive learning environment for our students. And the Halifax, Nova Scotia Down Syndrome Society has actually identified that children with Down syndrome are performing at rates today that would have never been dreamed of in the past, Mr. Speaker, and this is because of the love and support and advocacy of family members, parents, friends, and educators and volunteers. We are so fortunate to have such a strong community of people who support those in our society with Down syndrome, but we also, and I need to recognize the impact and positivity that those with Down syndrome have had on the rest of us. Thank you all so much.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Throughout the world, people of African descent continue to be besieged with gross injustice. This includes workers of African descent within HRM and all of Nova Scotia. As we sit here today, workers of African descent are rallying at Parade Square to stand up and be heard. Black workers continue to report on anti-Black racism and the toxic work environments that exist here in Nova Scotia. Indigenous peoples and racialized and religious minority communities in Canada continue to face racism and discrimination every day. This day serves as a call to action for individuals, organizations, and all levels of government to actively work to eliminate all forms of racial discrimination, injustice, systemic racism, and hate. I would like all members of this House to stand with me as we recommit our efforts to ensure all people are respected and have equal access and opportunity to be safe and to succeed.
The honourable member for Guysborough-Tracadie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I read my member's statement to recognize World Down Syndrome Day, I beg leave to make an introduction.
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Visiting us today in the gallery, the Speaker's Gallery, are members of the Halifax, Nova Scotia Down Syndrome Society, including Alison Brewer, the Chair, Will Brewer, Advocate Committee Chair, Mentor and Town Crier, and Kim Hanko, Vice Chair, Maureen Doherty, Caroline Sinyard, and Fiona Watt. We're also welcoming guests from the Special Olympics, including Scott Fwelling, a parent volunteer coach and provincial board member, and Patrick Fwelling, Special Olympic athlete. And Mr. Speaker, if it was appropriate, I'd ask if Will would like to take the opportunity to show us his skills as a town crier.
Oh yay! Oh yay! Oh yay! We're out. Today is World Down Syndrome Day in the House, and I would love to acknowledge them. Thank you so much.
The honourable member for Guysborough-Tracadie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Will. Fantastic. I rise in acknowledgement of World Down Syndrome Day. It is celebrated every year on the 21st of the third month as the numbers of this date symbolize a key trait shared by people with Down syndrome, 3 copies of chromosome 21. Today is a day to celebrate the lives of people with Down syndrome and to ensure they are afforded equal rights, freedoms, and opportunities. The theme this year, With Us, Not For Us, underscores the importance of taking a rights-based approach to supporting Nova Scotians living with Down syndrome. We also want to acknowledge all the families, friends, and organizations who do their part every day to ensure with us, not for us, are not just words, but are a way of life that all Nova Scotians respect. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members of this legislature to join me in celebrating Nova Scotia's Down syndrome's residents and let this wonderful community know that we in this House are with them, not for them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sydney, member 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, also I'm rising in my place to recognize World Down Syndrome Day and recognize the Cape Breton Zoom timers who, throughout the pandemic and continue, they've met with premiers, they've met with federal ministers, they've met with elected representatives, and they are great advocates in the community. They're very close friends of mine and my wife, Stephanie, who's also one of those educators in the school system, in the learning centers. But while we stand in the legislature today, Charles Levat is at the UN. And Charles is a kid in our community. Mr. Speaker, you may be aware of the family. I know the member from City of River-Mire, Lewisburg, may be as well, too. Charles is down representing Nova Scotia at the UN right now, promoting advocacy and self-awareness and self-support for individuals with Down syndrome. So I rise in my place today to recognize all of the Zoom timers for the amazing friendship and the conversations that I have with them, but especially to recognize Charles, who's representing all of us right now at the UN, supporting Nova Scotians. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
The honourable member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to recognize that today, March 21st, is my child Kira Jill's 17th birthday. Since we met Kira at 7 months old, they have been an energetic force in our lives. We watch with admiration as they bring their curiosity, determination, passion, and dedication to our entire extended family and to their friendships, school, work, and to the hockey rink. Mr. Speaker, I made Kira a 17th birthday playlist because, like all teenagers, they appreciate when I suggest music they may like. And musicians over the decades have identified 17 as a pivotal year of transition from child to adult. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in wishing Kira a happy 17th birthday and a year full of joy, adventure, and success.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I read my member's statement, I beg leave to make an introduction.
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Visiting us today in the West Gallery above me is Betty Thomas, a longtime advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion in our province, and a good friend to all of us here on this side of the legislature. I ask Betty to rise and accept the warm welcome of this House.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in our province, I would like to bring special attention to our friend, Betty Thomas. Betty is the consummate volunteer, spending a great deal of her time trying to make our society a better place for all Nova Scotians. Over the years, many organizations have benefited from her commitment to the community, whether as a member of the Legal Information Society of Nova Scotia, the Black Cultural Society, the East Preston Lioness Club, and as a chair of the Community and Race Relations Committee for Halifax Regional Municipality. Betty was also, you may not know, the producer and host of Equality Issues on the local cable television show for several years and is the president of our party's Diverse Communities Committee. Betty is passionate about acts of kindness and delivers a high level of client service as Justice of the Peace. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members of this House to join me in thanking Betty for all she has done over the years to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Bedford Basin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to rise today to speak about a difficult day yesterday for the Charles P. Allen family of schools and all of those who love those who are in that family of schools. When yesterday our school made the news for all the wrong reasons. So I want to thank the faculty, the staff, and the students for following directives on that day in the midst of a frightening situation. I want to wish a speedy recovery to the two staff members who are in hospital. And I want to make sure that everyone knows that counseling is available. I do appreciate that counseling was made available at the school today. I want to thank HRCE for reaching out when the members of this legislature began calling to say, you know, what's going on, getting back to us and letting us know what was going on. And I know that all members of this House will want to join me in letting people know that they are in our hearts and in our thoughts during this difficult time. And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Thank you. I'd like to draw the attention of the House to the fact that in Manitoba, major new improvements are being introduced between the 1st of this year and April for people with disabilities who receive income assistance. One, the basic needs component of these benefits in Manitoba is being indexed to inflation. Two, benefit levels are increasing $100 a month. Three, people with disabilities receiving provincial benefits are now able to earn up to $12,000 a year without any impact on benefits. In Nova Scotia, by comparison, benefit levels have been frozen during this government's tenure. There is no indexing to inflation, and people with disabilities receiving income support can only earn approximately 25% of what can be earned now without impact on benefits in the province of Manitoba. The upcoming budget provides an opportunity to improve this, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Bonnie Lee Farm. Bonnie Lee Farm offers a close-knit, supportive environment to empower adults with intellectual disabilities by providing opportunities to grow and succeed. They have built a strong partnership with Chester St. Margaret's and a strong community of donors, sponsors, and volunteers to provide one-stop, all-inclusive residential services, enhanced programs, and work placement opportunities. I'm excited to announce Bonnie Lee Farms is turning 50 this year. That's 50 years of making a difference not only in the constituency of Chester St. Margaret's, but also in this province. I ask all members of the Nova Scotia Legislature to join me in recognizing the continuous work and wish Bonnie Lee Farms a happy birthday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a moment to recognize Paddy Gray from Sambro. Paddy is a legendary figure from our community. He's been a fisherman his whole life, making his living on the water. Paddy's an advocate for the community, including being the harbour master of Sambro. Paddy volunteers, works behind the scenes, advocate, and is a voice for the community and our fishers. The community is a better place because of Paddy, a true friend and community warrior. Paddy, thank you for all you do. Our community is better because of you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. As I deliver my first member statement of the spring session, I feel compelled to acknowledge the sacrifice and the bravery of Mr. Gunter Holthoff, and his young family. As my colleagues are aware, Gunter's wife, Allison, died tragically on December the 31st, 2022, while awaiting in one of our emergency departments here in the province, suffering with abdominal pain. Gunter and his children have been through unimaginable pain and suffering, but are trying to move forward through this loss. I also want to acknowledge the tiny community of Tidnish, where the Holthoffs live, and that community has wrapped their arms around this family as they go through this tragedy. Allison was a member of the local fire department. She was the fire chief, deputy fire chief. She was involved in all community organizations. She was that mother that brought in teenage children without a home. She was that person. All of the folks of Tidnish truly represent the lifeblood of our community. That is our people and the strength of our people. Nova Scotia strong. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I make an introduction?
Please do.
Thank you very much. I'd like to draw the House's attention to the gallery opposite, where we have a guest today, Raisa Lalani. Raisa is the artistic director of the Prismatic Arts Festival, which is an incredible arts festival in the province, bringing world-class performances of all nature to Nova Scotia. As well, Raisa is the chair of the board of Zupa Theatre. You may have heard of Zupa Theatre. It's a company that I worked with for 20 years. And now I'm on the board of Zupa too, so I get to work alongside. Also, Raisa was a student of mine at Dalhousie in acting, and she's just the best. So I'd like to welcome her to the House. Thank you, Raisa, for being here.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My member statement is unrelated to Raisa. On this International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, I rise to draw attention to the unjust treatment of migrant workers, many of whom are racialized in Nova Scotia. In order to access our province's public health care system, migrant workers must have a one-year work permit. But unfortunately, contracts under the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program are at the most 8 months per calendar year. And this means that all workers under that program have to pay for their health care or rely on insurance packages negotiated by their employers. I draw to the House's attention Carrie Ann Burnett, an agricultural worker from Jamaica, diagnosed with cancer in September of 2022 while working on a Nova Scotia strawberry farm. Ms. Burnett was fired after becoming ill and so doesn't have access to private health insurance that was tied to her employment. She is accumulating thousands of dollars in medical bills. No One is Illegal, Halifax Jabuktuk, has created a GoFundMe campaign to help her. I join No One is Illegal in calling on the government to extend MSI benefits to all migrant workers.
The honourable member for Queens.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Queens County athlete Michael Morrow on receiving the 2022 Male Athlete of the Year Award at the Special Olympics Nova Scotia Inspire Gala on February 22nd. Michael has been competing for over 20 years in the sports of snowshoeing, athletics, and bowling. He was on Team Nova Scotia at the 2020 Winter Games in Thunder Bay and earned a seat on the Team Canada contingency that was to compete at the World Games in 2022. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in applauding this inspirational young man on this well-deserved honor and in wishing him continued success. I am truly his biggest fan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss if I, too, didn't express my condolences to the Charles P. Allen High School family in light of the incident that took place at the school yesterday in my riding of Bedford South. Like the member for Bedford Basin, I'd like to wish a speedy and fast and complete recovery to those who were injured, and thank the first responders, and particularly the police and the paramedics who helped in a moment of great need. As a former cheetah and someone who has CPA near and dear to my heart, I'd ask all members of the House to join me in wishing the staff, students, and extended Charles P. Allen family nothing but the best as they begin the difficult but necessary healing process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the Dartmouth General Foundation and the J&W Murphy Foundation on their unprecedented gift to the hospital announced today. Their gift will kickstart the $15 million Lead On campaign, the goal of which is to positively impact patient care at the Dartmouth General. This includes purchasing Dartmouth General's first and much-needed MRI unit, enhancing the emergency department, acquiring high-priority equipment, further developing orthopedic care, advancing health equity, and infrastructure changes, all of which patients have a right to expect and which they deserve. As our hospitals and medical professionals continue to experience the strain of the healthcare crisis, please join me in thanking the Dartmouth General Foundation and the J&W Murphy Foundation and the community of Dartmouth in generously stepping in to fill the gaps.
The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Elizabeth Covey of Lunenburg on being named Female Athlete of the Year by the Nova Scotia Special Olympics. Elizabeth began competing 12 years ago after a school teacher involved with Special Olympics started taking her bowling on a weekly basis. Through that activity, she met a friend who introduced her to competitive swimming, and a love of sports was born. Elizabeth has competed in both the Summer and Winter Provincial Games and the National Summer Games in running, shot put, long jump, swimming, snowshoeing, and bocce. She's also a keen downhill skier and participates in the Able Sail program at the Lunenburg Yacht Club. Her bedroom, I'm told, is covered in medals and trophies. Mr. Speaker, please join me in celebrating this remarkable young athlete. Thank you.
The honourable member for Clayton Park West.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to, as my colleague from Digby Annapolis also did, to wish everyone who's celebrating Nowruz today a very happy Nowruz. Nowruz has been celebrated for over 3,000 years, and over 300 million people across the world are celebrating Nowruz today. So it emphasizes the importance of family, friendship, and cultural diversity. But what is really important is how many people from Iran, from Afghanistan, and from the Kurdish community who are celebrating today. We have a large community in Clayton Park West, and I'm just wishing them all a very happy Nowruz. And I was always looking forward to Nowruz celebration, especially for the Iranian event. But when I spoke to them yesterday, I said, how come I wasn't invited this year? They said they're not holding it because of what's happening in Iran, in solidarity with the women in Iran. And my heart goes out to all the women in Iran on a day like today. Thank you so much.
The honourable member for Antigonish. Oh, sorry. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Pier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the eve of the conciliation meeting with the provincial government and CUPE school support staff scheduled for March 22nd, I want to show solidarity with CUPE school support workers in Nova Scotia. Support workers have voted 97.5% in favor of taking strike action if an agreement that lifts education workers out of poverty cannot be reached. Most CUPE education workers earn less than Nova Scotia's median wage of $35,000 per year. I don't think that is too much to ask, Mr. Speaker. The support staff in education drive children to school, keep the libraries open, work one-on-one with students, repair equipment, ensure recess and lunch run smoothly, keep school facilities clean, provide safe learning spaces, and administer clerical tasks. Schools, Mr. Speaker, do not run without them. Thank you.
The honourable member for Antigonish.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Antigonisher Christian Garrow, who was named to Team Canada for the Special Olympics World Summer Games. Christian will be traveling to Berlin, Germany in June. Christian is a member of the Eastern Highlands Special Olympics team and competes in the 100-meter race as well as the standing long jump. Joan Conrad, regional coordinator, says Christian is one of her top athletes. Christian has been competing in the Special Olympics since he was young and has competed at the national level in Vancouver in 2014 and in Antigonish in 2018. I would also like to thank all of those who volunteer, giving their time and skills to help Christian prepare for Summer Games. Christian is very fortunate to have so many wonderful people supporting him, from his coaches who are training him to all those in our community who are fundraising for him. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members of the House to wish Christian good luck as he proudly represents Canada at the Special Olympics. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax Armdale.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize today is International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Mr. Speaker, we know the harm of racial discrimination, and I will ask all Nova Scotians to take an action for this Racial Discrimination Day of March 21st. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to thank the organizers of rallies and demonstrations happening today, all within a stone's throw of Province House, raising awareness about serious challenges facing our province, whether it's racism in the workplace, respecting education workers, or ensuring everyone has access to safe and affordable housing. People and communities are stepping up and demanding more from their government. I would like to ask everyone in this House to join me in congratulating the organizers and support folks of today's events for fighting for a better Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Queens.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Rebecca Delaney of Liverpool on receiving the 2022 Frank Hayden Award at the Special Olympics Nova Scotia Inspire Gala on February 22nd. This prestigious award is named in honor of the researcher and companion of the Order of Canada who has sparked the Special Olympics movement over 50 years ago. It is presented to an athlete who has best exemplified the spirit, philosophy, and goals of the Special Olympics movement over the course of their career. Rebecca began competing at the age of 18 and has met with success at both the Winter and Summer Games. She has earned the highest respect of her teammates and coaches, and all of Queens is so proud of her. Mr. Speaker, please join me in applauding this inspirational young woman on this well-deserved honor and in wishing her a bright and successful future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I stand to recognize a young man from Cape Breton named Nathan McNeil. Nathan came to my office very early in my time as an MLA, advocating on behalf of those with diabetes in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and beyond. And Nathan is a very strong advocate for the glucose monitoring systems being free for all Nova Scotians. I fully support Nathan, and I'm so happy to stand here today with this leader of the Liberal Party who put that bill forward today. So thank you, Nathan, for all your hard work and advocacy.
Order, please. The time for statement by members has expired. The time is now 2 o'clock. We'll move into oral questions put by members to ministers. We will be going until 2:50. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Nice to be back in the House. Mr. Speaker, it has been 581 days since this Premier was elected, and during that time, inflation has really skyrocketed in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, people can't afford to put gas in their cars. The price of groceries is getting out of control, whether it's milk, eggs, bread, meat, or vegetables. Cooking family dinners has become more of a struggle for many families in Nova Scotia. In fact, Nova Scotians are expected to pay more than $1,000 more in food this year, Mr. Speaker, and I will table that. Also, Mr. Speaker, despite the Premier's promise to stop this from happening, power rates are going to be going up 14%. Inflation is continuing to raise prices, and mortgages and rents are going up as well, Mr. Speaker. This is despite the fact that the Deputy Premier told us that inflation would just go away. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier is, when will this government take definitive action to help Nova Scotians dealing with inflationary pressures?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for that important question. Obviously, the affordability issues facing Nova Scotians and all Canadians and really North Americans are of concern to all governments. And well, a couple things, Mr. Speaker. Number one, we know what won't help, and that's the liberal carbon tax, which is barreling down the trains towards us. I'd encourage the member to stand up against his federal cousins, against the liberal carbon tax. That won't be helpful. But in terms of definitive action, Mr. Speaker, of course, Nova Scotians know about the $1,000 home heating rebate. We bumped that up from $200, Mr. Speaker. Of course, Nova Scotians will know about the support for heat pump installation. We are taking definitive action, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to take definitive action.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A reminder to the House and to Nova Scotians that we have a carbon tax coming in Nova Scotia because the Houston government cut the cap and trade system that we had as a replacement.
Order, please. I'd ask that the member withdraw the name of the individual in charge of government.
Allow me to rephrase, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we have a carbon tax coming in Nova Scotia because the Premier and his government cut a cap and trade system that was the replacement for carbon pricing in Nova Scotia, to the detriment of Nova Scotians, we believe. Also, Mr. Speaker, the Premier says that this is a national issue, but in fact, Nova Scotia inflation is rising higher than the rest of the country, and I'd like to ask the Premier why that is the case under his leadership.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's a Nova Scotian and certainly maybe even a person alive that believes that it's anyone but the Liberals that are pushing the carbon tax on Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. So we can stick to the facts on that. Carbon tax, bad thing, not good, won't help the environment, certainly won't help Nova Scotians, and it's a Liberal carbon tax, Mr. Speaker, and I wish that member would stand up against it.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
And once again, Mr. Speaker, the great solutionists can only offer blame in this House instead of actual solutions to help Nova Scotians. What is he going to do about it? He didn't present an alternative. He actually cut the alternative that was in place to keep a carbon tax from coming here, and here we are, and all he can do is blame the Liberal Party. I think that's shameful, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotia is also been leading the country in homelessness, Mr. Speaker, and I'll table that. Nova Scotia was also last in the country when it came to housing starts, with vacancy rates at 1% province-wide. People in this province are facing real affordability issues, Mr. Speaker. People don't see themselves getting ahead anymore. We have a generation of Nova Scotians who are worried they'll never be able to afford a home, and yet this Premier, all he can do is stand up in this House and blame Liberals for a carbon tax coming, Mr. Speaker. When is he actually going to provide some support to Nova Scotians who are not getting ahead right now because of this situation?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, just to correct the record, in fact, we did put a solution forward to the federal government. We put a very viable solution forward to the federal government. And you know what the you know what the opposition party said, both of them, Mr. Speaker, what they said? No, thank you. No, 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 no. All this opposition party, both of them know about is no, Mr. Speaker. We're moving this province forward. They can be negative. We're optimistic about the future.
Order,
Nova Scotians are optimistic about the future. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier, and it's about a time that he said no, just recently. Later this year, 4,100 people will lose their doctor when the South End Family Practice Clinic closes their doors. Dr. Maria Sampson from the clinic said, "The current state of healthcare in Nova Scotia and the lack of support for primary care providers has accelerated this closure. Despite working with Nova Scotia physician recruitment team for over a year, we have not secured a replacement physician to take over any of our patients." Mr. Speaker, how bad is the primary care situation going to get before this government will help Nova Scotians who don't have a doctor?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a couple of things I would say on that. Obviously, we work hard to support doctors and healthcare providers in this province, including those that are planning on retiring. There's quite a process there, Mr. Speaker. The only thing we ask in return, and we try to provide resources to support people, maybe provide a nurse practitioner, maybe provide a family practice nurse, is that they support more Nova Scotians. So we'll work with the doctors of this province. I believe the doctors of this province know that, Mr. Speaker. And what I would say to those Nova Scotians that are on the list needing primary care, Mr. Speaker, we know we've made virtual care available to every single one of them. We know that we're attaching them to clinics. We know the pharmacy clinics are helping, Mr. Speaker. The mobile clinics are working, Mr. Speaker. We are moving forward because healthcare is demanding we move forward with new solutions.
Of the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, people in this province deserve to have a permanent family health team, but 2 more doctors at the Spryfield Family Medicine Clinic are also leaving their practice. These doctors say that despite asking for help from this government, their calls for support have gone unanswered. They got a no. Dr. Rawicka said, "We are basically swamped and exhausted. We're on the verge of burnout," and I'll table that. These 2 doctors care for 4,000 people, but the government said they would only help them if they take on more patients. Now, our Premier is a CPA. Surely he understands that 8,000 people without access to a family doctor is not worth pressuring a few burnt-out doctors to take on a few more patients.
Please. The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we're working to support the doctors of this province and the healthcare professionals of this province. People may have noticed the incentive we offered to healthcare workers just yesterday to say thank you for working so hard through this process, Mr. Speaker. We are supporting healthcare workers in this province in every way we can. No question, Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of work to be done, and no question was going to require a number of solutions. But what won't help, Mr. Speaker, is the negativity of the opposition on all these issues. We want people to have access to primary care. We're coming up with innovative new solutions to move this province forward, and we will support the doctors through that process, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party on her final supplementary.
Adding 8,000 people to the 137,000 person wait list of people waiting for a family health team is not positivity. It's a problem. David Waring is one of the many Nova Scotians who will join that list when his clinic closes at the end of this year. He explains, "This clinic has been here for my entire family through our healthcare needs. The clinic has supported us through the birth of 2 children and the death of 1. The closing of this clinic means that our entire family is now without access to primary care." Mr. Speaker, will the Premier commit to going back to the table with these doctors and doing whatever it takes to keep these clinics open and these 8,000 patients with access to care?
As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I've reached out to those doctors very specifically and offered to do whatever is necessary, as we do, as the team at Health does. People will retire, Mr. Speaker, and doctors should have a right to retire as well, Mr. Speaker, without being made feel guilty about it. But what I would say to the member's specific person and the message to him is, because you are on that list, does not mean you do not have access to care. Mr. Speaker, we have offered virtual care to everyone on that list, 100% of them. 57,000 Nova Scotians have signed up for that. Almost 97,000 Nova Scotians that are on that list have access to a primary care clinic where they can seek medical treatment in person or virtually, Mr. Speaker. 125 family physicians per 100,000 Nova Scotians. That's what we have in this province. And they're supplemented by, of course, Mr. Speaker, urgent treatment centers, expanded pharmacy services, Mr. Speaker, mobile clinics, Mr. Speaker. There is access to care.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it has been 581 days since the Premier was elected on a promise to give every single Nova Scotian working in the private sector a better paycheck guarantee. And he promised to do that on day 1, Mr. Speaker, and I will table that quote. Since the cost of living has gone up month after month and families and seniors all across the province are feeling the sting of this, Nova Scotia continues to have some of the highest levels of inflation in the country, Mr. Speaker. And our government programs are just not keeping up, and people in the middle class and the working class of this province are really having a hard time making ends meet and planning for the future. The government's economic platform was also a Nova Scotia Loyal program that would have incentivized and rewarded purchasing of local goods. We haven't seen that either, Mr. Speaker. If there was a time to bring in 2 of the government's promises, it is right now during this inflationary crisis. When are Nova Scotians going to see a better paycheck guaranteed to them in the private sector, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that the priority of this government is fixing health care. It's costing a lot of money, Mr. Speaker. That is where our focus is. I should remind the member, though, Mr. Speaker, we did introduce the More Opportunity for Skilled Trades, Mr. Speaker. And we hope that that will support and encourage young people under the age of 30 to stay in Nova Scotia, or come home to Nova Scotia, or to come here for the first time, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier said that Nova Scotians will be given a better paycheck guarantee on day 1. The Minister of Finance said it was going to be within the first 12 months of their government. And here we are 581 days later, and Nova Scotians are dealing with higher rent, higher mortgage rates, higher food costs, higher power rates, higher costs on gas, higher costs on everything, and this government is backing down on this key election promise that they made to Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. I guess a better paycheck guarantee wasn't much of a guarantee after all, was it, Mr. Speaker? Can the Premier or the Minister of Finance tell us right now, are they scrapping that election promise?
Hey, good question.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the budget is coming on Thursday, and I think we should all wait to see what's in it.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Basin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last 581 days, healthcare in Nova Scotia has gotten worse and worse. We've seen the doctor wait list double to over 137,000. We've seen ambulance offloads increase. The government broke its promises to reduce the surgical backlog in its first 18 months and to meet national surgery wait time benchmarks. And just weeks ago, another family practice shut down because this government would not give the doctors in the clinic the support they needed to continue. Mr. Speaker, over the 19 months of the government's mandate, the number of Nova Scotians who need a family doctor has grown higher and higher every single month. Where's that fix the Premier promised?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for the question. So I want to assure the members in this House that the team has been working incredibly hard. We've under difficult circumstances. We've been working diligently with all of our partners across the healthcare system, looking at ways in which people can access healthcare. Attachment and access are not the same thing. So we know that we have access through virtual care in Nova Scotia. We know that we have virtual care emergency departments in this province. We have 97,000 people who can access a primary care provider through virtual care with a referral to inpatient visits at the primary care clinic if they so choose. We have mobile clinics, Mr. Speaker. We have stand-up respiratory clinics, and we continue to work in communities to leverage their assets to make sure Nova Scotians get the care they need.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Emergency room closures in Nova Scotia doubled last year. ER wait times are up across the province. And tragically, emergency room deaths, Mr. Speaker, increased by 10%. This government has presided over one of the largest declines in primary care access in decades, and indications are in recent months it's actually accelerated that trend. Not slowed it, accelerated. How long does the Premier think Nova Scotians can afford to wait for him to fulfill his promises?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to assure the members opposite that we've already made historic investments in healthcare in this province, and we will continue to do so. It speaks absolutely to the mess we were left from the former government, and I can tell you specifically because I worked in it, Mr. Speaker, but the beauty is we've been across this province talking to healthcare workers, and we've talked to 20 communities about what it is they need, and I'm confident in the team's ability and the budget we'll put forward to improve healthcare in this province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has been over 18 months since the government was elected, and in their platform it states, a PC government will cut out the inefficiencies related to the operation of our ORs and allow them to run outside normal business hours until the backlog has been addressed. Our goal will be meet the benchmark standards for wait times within 18 months of being elected, and I'll table that. In the minister's mandate letter, it commits to this as well, specifically, and I quote, to meet the benchmark standards for wait times as established by the Wait Time Alliance within 18 months of being elected. Mr. Speaker, we are past the deadline. This is a promise that has been broken, and the mandate has not been met. Why did this government fail to deliver on this clear election commitment?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for the question. We really are pleased with the progress that the teams are making in this surgical wait time list. For the past 6 months, our surgical growth rate is less than 1, which says that we are removing more people from the wait list than we are adding. We are, there's been 6,000 more cataract surgeries in 2023, an increase of 3,700 from 2022. We've opened additional inpatient beds at Dartmouth General, as well as a third endoscopy unit, Mr. Speaker. There's a number of investments, and we're making very clear progress in terms of our commitment to Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the answer. When appearing before the Health Committee in December, interim Nova Scotia Health CEO Kieran Oldfield said, to get to the national benchmark, which we have set in our plan, it will take until mid-2025 to do that. And that will happen at a rate of 2,500 additional surgeries a year. She also said, where's a Bible? We don't have a Bible. Then I cross my heart. We will move the surgical wait list, and I'll table that. So my question is, when can the thousands of Nova Scotians waiting on the list expect 24/7 surgeries as promised in the PC election platform? And this year, are we going to hit the additional 2,500 surgeries as promised by the Nova Scotia Health CEO?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first thing I do want to make sure that Nova Scotians know is that our emergency surgeries are open 24/7, and that there is access in this event of an emergency, that patients can access that care. So we are doing a number of things to support people who are waiting for surgery. We're looking at an e-referral, centralized e-referral process, and a centralized booking so that primary care providers can understand where the shortest wait lists are for their patients. There was 1,098 same-day hip and knee arthroplasty surgeries compared to only 72 in 2019-2020, Mr. Speaker, and I believe that that is progress.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Internal Services. I would like to share the story of Elizabeth O'Hanley, who used to live in an apartment in Dartmouth that cost $925 a month. She was forced to move out along with others in her building when her landlord refused to renew her fixed-term lease. Later, her unit was listed for $2,200. This is one of dozens of stories like this. All of them perfectly legal. Mr. Speaker, does the minister think it's acceptable that someone could be at risk of becoming homeless for no other reason than that the landlord wants to double the rent?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the member bringing forward this question to the floor. Again, Mr. Speaker, I want to emphasize that our government supports the intended use of fixed-term leases. What I've heard in the media last number of months is specifically regarding the unintended use of fixed-term leases, and that is concerning, Mr. Speaker. As we look to strengthen and to modernize the residential tenancy program, we do engage with our stakeholders. We hear their feedback, both from the tenant and landlord groups, Mr. Speaker. That's very valuable feedback. Again, any changes that I look to make in this legislature, it's always looking through that lens of balancing the rights and responsibilities of both tenants and landlords. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm hearing that we should close that loophole. Mr. Speaker, Diana Devlin was leasing a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment from Peppermint Properties with her 92-year-old mother since 2018, when the landlord told them he would not be renewing their lease. Diana and her mother were paying $1,800 a month for their apartment. A few days ago, it was listed for $2,600. Diana and her mother are two of the many people facing this situation, all perfectly legal. Mr. Speaker, why is the minister continuing to allow fixed-term leases to be used this way?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As it's been implied, I mean, some of the challenges in respect to what the member is raising today on the floor is regarding the rent cap, and as it had been noted previously, as landlords trying to circumnavigate the existing 2% rent cap, Mr. Speaker. That's another topic that we've engaged with our stakeholders. I've met with a number of the stakeholders last fall, and we'll certainly have more to say specifically in respect to the rent cap in the near future, Mr. Speaker. But again, we're continuously looking at ways to modernizing and strengthening the residential tenancy program, and that includes informing Nova Scotians of the rights and responsibilities, continuing the great work of awareness and education campaigns for both tenants and landlords that we started, and we'll continue doing that in the near future.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government of Nova Scotia has recently released their healthcare development plan, which, like many of their other plans, are heavy on promises and light on details. Mr. Speaker, we'd like to know where in this plan it calls for $34 million of government taxpayer money to purchase an unfinished hotel. That's 3.5 times its market value. To be clear, an independent report states, and I quote, "Even with costly and time-consuming redesign and renovations, the building cannot be adapted to suit the patient profile without severe restrictions on patient admission eligibility." And I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, does the Premier think that acting against expert advice and drastically overpaying for an unsuitable building is a good use of taxpayer money?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to reassure the member that we did pay within that price range, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to speak to a draft report, Mr. Speaker, but one thing's clear. One thing's very clear is the difference between our government and the former government is room for excuses, Mr. Speaker, and sitting on our hands. This party here, Mr. Speaker, is interested in doing things differently, embarking on a journey of transforming healthcare, of developing first-time in Canada solutions, or first-time in Nova Scotia solutions, such as a transition to community facility that's going to increase capacity and access to beds in our province, Mr. Speaker. We need beds, beds, beds. The Premier's been very clear. Let's do more, and let's do it faster. Let's go like hell.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, the one thing that this government is doing differently is rewarding their friends. hiring their friends, paying their friends, and purchasing buildings at 3.5 times their market value. It's not a draft report. So, Mr. Speaker, at $34 million, this makes this unfinished hotel the most expensive hotel to ever trade hands in Nova Scotia, coming in at $312,000 per room. To top it off, the minister stated in February, the government hasn't even decided how they will use the hotel, despite rushing to purchase it via an alternative procurement in a 24-hour time frame. And I can table that. Can the Premier tell the House exactly how the government will adapt this hotel, how long it's going to take, and how much it's going to cost? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Mr. Speaker, I believe, and I want to clarify that for the record, and perhaps the member can look it up as well, as that assessment values from 2019 prior to any development on the site. Mr. Speaker, we engaged with an international firm to do that that assessment of the property, Mr. Speaker. We did pay it within range, Mr. Speaker. Again, on December 15th...
Order, please. Order, please. The Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, has the floor. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On December 15th, we embarked on a different path, Mr. Speaker, to delivering more for Nova Scotians, and by doing it faster, Mr. Speaker, by adding a new ER on the to the HI site, Mr. Speaker, adding more beds to the HI site, Mr. Speaker, adding more surgical capacity, Mr. Speaker. These are all great things, Mr. Speaker. Again, we're not in the business of sitting on excuses, Mr. Speaker. We're looking to move forward on this file.
The Honourable Member for Clayton Park West.
Mr. Speaker, last month, the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction announced $2.3 million per year for access to a one-on-one counselling session for Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I was elated, especially after the pandemic and the need for mental health, until I found out that it is 1 hour. 1 hour session. Mr. Speaker, we all know mental health requires minimum 5 to 10 sessions. They do not start treatment before 4 or 5 sessions. So whoever advised this minister that 1 hour session somehow is going to help, I don't know. And on top of it, they are put on a wait list for 100 to 150 days. Does the minister think that 1 hour session is access to mental health, and it's the promise of universal mental health?
The Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. So this is a new improved service for all Nova Scotians, which is available for a host of reasons, ranging from gambling to could be for depressions or substance use disorder. These 4 pilot sites are embedded in the communities across the province and are also accessible via telehealth and virtual health for all Nova Scotians to use. So our goal is to help people early, and this is a new service and complementary to our highly accessible acute services based in the healthcare system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before I recognize the member, would the minister just move the mic down a little bit closer? They're not hearing you very well on this side. The Honourable Member for Clayton Park West.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the minister for the answer. However, he didn't answer my question at all. And my question right now, Mr. Speaker, is wouldn't that money, the $2.3 million, be better spent on reducing wait times for mental health services here in the province? Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the minister why this money is being given to a third-party provider for only 1 hour treatment when we could have invested in more mental health counselors from here, from Nova Scotia, so that the wait times are reduced.
The Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Addiction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for the question. So this is a free evidence-based service offered by clinicians that are all from Nova Scotia. So I've been very clear from the start that we're going to leverage partnerships with the private sector. As the reason why the third party, that was through the standard procurement process in the province, and I have no worries with that delivery of care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, we know the federal government has recently negotiated bilateral agreements with each province and territory in the country. And of the $42.6 billion distributed nationally, the Nova Scotia agreement is for $1.03 billion over 10 years. Now, if we compare what Nova Scotians are receiving to the other Atlantic provinces, we find we are receiving the least amount per capita of any of the 4 Atlantic provinces. In fact, if you look at the average, which includes Nova Scotia, we are receiving $224 per person less than the average in the Atlantic provinces. Doesn't sound like much.
Question, please.
But it's $230 million. Is there a good reason that Nova Scotia has the worst deal in the Atlantic provinces? Is there a reason for this, or is this just poor negotiations?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Dear, Mr. Speaker. So I'm not a bit concerned about this. We always want more from the federal government, and I'd be very happy if you'd write a letter yourself and tell them that we're very anxious to accept more. We've done very good negotiations. We have a good relationship with our federal counterparts, and I know that we can use that money and more, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to ask for more from our federal counterparts.
The Honourable Member for King South.
I think what I heard there is we got a bad deal. This cash infusion requires the province to meet specific targets, and when it comes to specific targets, this government has been consistent in its failure to set them and failure to meet them. Mr. Speaker, we do not want to risk being in a position where we fall short of these targets and risk missing out on our vital health care funding. We need to have our own oversight to make sure we're on track to meeting our obligations. Mr. Speaker, will the government release the benchmarks that are part of this new bilateral funding agreement so that Nova Scotians can know if this government is meeting their targets?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I would say a little less politely is that I don't agree with the member, and perhaps he could check his math. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. This government has spent tens of millions of dollars on private travel nurse agencies since it was elected. This is money that, instead of going into our public system, is being spent on for-profit nurse agencies. Earlier, when asked about the high cost of travel nursing, the Premier said we just can't compete with the appeal of travel nursing. Mr. Speaker, other provinces actually have an explicit plan to phase out the use of travel nurses. When will the province spend $0 on private travel nurse agencies?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We made a good start yesterday by spending $350 million on 55,000 employees. We signaled to our registered nurses and LPNs and NPs across this province that they are valuable to us. We're looking at incenting people to come back. We know that we need those travel nurses right now because of the shortage in the workforce, but we are committed. We've increased the number of seats. We've shortened the process in order to get legislation. The answer to getting off the dependency on those nurses is to have more nurses in the system, and we are very committed to that. Every nursing student in this province has been offered a job for the next 5 years. We've been looking at immigration pathways through the Office of Healthcare Professional Recruitment.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, no question the retention bonus for nurses and other healthcare workers is going to help a lot of people and may convince them to stay. But you can't retain staff where there aren't any in the first place. Some hospitals are working at an 80% vacancy rate. These acute shortages are why the Nurses Union has asked the province to create a public travel nurse program for Nova Scotia that would incentivize nurses to work in areas that are chronically short, like has happened in Manitoba and Newfoundland and Labrador. So, Mr. Speaker, will the minister commit to creating a public travel nursing program in Nova Scotia so that staff in chronically short areas can get some help?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would appreciate it if the member opposite would table the hospital in which there's an 80% vacancy rate. I don't feel that that's fair to be promoting that number and scaring Nova Scotians when that, in fact, is not the case. I've been not made aware of that. We are doing a number of things across this province to support recruitment and retention of our nursing staff, as well as other healthcare professionals. We have the Office of Healthcare Professional Recruitment. We are working with Nova Scotia Health around recruitment initiatives. We are working with nursing schools and investing in education in this province. We have traveled throughout 20 communities in this province to speak directly to communities to tell them that there is healthcare opportunity in every corner and community in this province, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue to do more to increase our nursing supply.
The Honourable Member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the doctor waitlist has doubled since this government came to power, but if you drill down in the central zone, it's actually even worse. It's tripled in the central zone. Mr. Speaker, we are now the only Atlantic province which does not have any recruitment incentive to practice in the capital region for new family doctors. I'd like to ask the Minister of Health and Wellness if she agrees that it was a mistake to get rid of that incentive, and we are now seeing the consequences of that decision. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for the question. We do know that a large percentage of the need of family practice registry in this urban region is driven by immigration, people moving to this part of the province. We also know that there are a number of physicians retiring, so there's a number of things that we're doing. We're working with Dow Family Medicine to look at incubator clinics to support new physicians in looking at a community or a collaborative care practice, Mr. Speaker, in order to transition them out to community. We're looking at a variety of ways to work with them. Nicole Boutlier, Dr. Nicole Boutlier recently reached out to physicians to tell them that we want to work with them in order to support them in their practices. We've increased the number of medical residency seats. There's a number of things, Mr. Speaker, we're doing, and we'll continue to do more until we fix the health care.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Centre.
Mr. Speaker, what's odd to me today is that both the Premier and the Minister of Health and Wellness have talked about how important it is to incentivize healthcare professionals to stay and practice here in Nova Scotia. And we agree, and yet, at the same time, last year they axed an incentive that has led to really serious consequences in the central zone, where the number of people without a family doctor has tripled. In the Bedford-Sackville region, it is up 6.5 times, 650% in a year and a half. There needs to be substantial, real incentives to retain family doctors in the fastest growing part of our province, as the minister mentioned. So I would ask the minister, will she commit to reinstating the much-needed incentive for family practice doctors in the central zone? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that there are a variety of ways in which physicians want to practice across this province, and we know that an urban practice is different than a rural practice. We are working with physicians. We're working with Doctors Nova Scotia to better understand what the physicians would like to see. We are in the middle of negotiations with them now. There are a number of things that we are working with and supporting practices in order to transition and transform healthcare from that single entry of physicians only working together to a collaborative team approach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, in the PC platform it states, and I quote, "We need managers with a broader range of expertise. We need fewer managers. There appears too frequently to be redundancies in the work being done." Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier after 19 months, why has the only change to the organizational structure of the NSHA been installing a political ally with no healthcare experience as the interim CEO?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, we have a very dynamic healthcare leadership team. We have a CEO, we have the Deputy Minister, we have an administrator, and we have a physician that leads our healthcare system. The current President and CEO of this Nova Scotia Health is a dynamic leader who is well known across not only this country but the world for her ability to deliver results. She is a transformational leader. She has done incredible things since she has taken that position, and I am very pleased with the work that's happened under her leadership.
Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Respectfully, the current CEO has no healthcare experience. The platform goes on to say that we can establish this by optimizing the administration based on the needs of the patients and the communities to recognize different frames of expertise and backgrounds, more diversity, and empowering patient-driven decision-making. Mr. Speaker, at one point in time, we actually had a diverse board filled with healthcare experts, but this government fired them all to install a political ally. Mr. Speaker, when will this government reinstate a Nova Scotia Health Authority board with a CEO and a board that leads our healthcare system based on experience?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for the question. So we continue to need an agile leadership team that's able to make decisions in a timely manner. Over the last number of months, we've been working on a health equity framework, and there have been a number of community consultations that have been led by the Department of Health and Nova Scotia Health to better understand the needs of diverse communities. We are going directly to people to hear from them in community to understand how best to support people who are equity seeking, not only for community-based care, but also in terms of the hospital. So there is more work to do. There's more to say, but I'm very pleased with the way that our teams have reached out to community to better understand their needs. Thank you.
The honourable member for Northside and Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's very clear that being a friend or a political ally of this government pays dividends in Nova Scotia currently. Mr. Speaker, just recently we see that a former candidate had a special housing development project added to a special list, allowing that project to circumvent normal policies and procedures around housing developments. Mr. Speaker, why do friends and political allies of the Premier and this government seem to get preferential treatment while other Nova Scotians are left behind?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for the question. I would like to say that we have done an incredible amount of work over the last 2 years in housing. We've invested over $200 million, done projects all over the province with all kinds of people. We will continue to do projects like that, and that project in that particular area had a component of seniors long-term care. We've invested an incredible amount of money, and as the member may know or may not know, there really had not been any significant investment in seniors and long-term care in 3 governments. And we're doing that. So when we see projects that we can expedite and move along, we don't look at who they were. We look at what they can do and what area they are in. So we're very pleased to have done that project.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it just so happens by coincidence that this special project is led by a former candidate with, from my understanding, little to no housing development experience. Mr. Speaker, my question is how do I get, or how does a Nova Scotian get a project on this special list? Thank you very much.
The Honourable Minister for Municipal Affairs and Housing.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to say that, as the member may know, we just recently announced a number of projects, including a number up in the Cape Breton area. So the way to get a project done is simply to apply, to come to us, to talk to us. We're open to hear from anybody. We're doing projects in all over the province, including in the Cape Breton area where the member is from. So we will continue to do projects. We will continue to work with Nova Scotians who want to work with us and who want to help us address the housing crisis, which extends from one part of the one end of the province to the other.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. My question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. In January of this year, Nova Scotians voiced collective outrage over the state of our emergency departments following the tragic deaths of both Alison Holthoff and Charlene Snow. In response, this government released a list of action items to improve ER care. When these actions were released, there was some hope that this government had begun to understand the urgency and gravity of the situation. However, 2 months later, it's becoming clear that progress on these items has been slow. Nova Scotians are desperate to see concrete actions implemented to improve ER conditions before another tragedy occurs. This government has no shortage of promises and plans, but that's not enough. When will we see this government walk the talk on emergency care?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for the question. We too were very saddened to hear about the situations in the emergency rooms in January, and it prompted us to act very quickly. There are patient advocates now in place in every emergency department in this province. There are waiting room care providers at Dartmouth General and the QE2, and there's processes around hiring more so that people can get care in the emergency room. We have virtual care in the emergency department as well to support people who have low acuity in order to make sure that their wait is much shorter, and the average wait time for those folks is down around 50 minutes, Mr. Speaker. We've hired physician assistants at Dartmouth General, and we're currently in the process of hiring physician assistants at Bridgewater. We have a second EHS airplane, which will help move people throughout this province and put EHS trucks back on the road, Mr. Speaker. There's been a number of issues.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, we know the heartbreaking stories reported earlier this year are far from the only such incidents. ER deaths are increasing and Nova Scotians are alarmed. Data obtained through Freedom of Information showed that 2022 had both the highest number and highest proportion, of emergency room fatalities in the past 5 years, and I can table that. Nova Scotians deserve the full picture of what's going on, and we need a government committed to preventing future tragedies. Earlier this year, our caucus called for an inquiry into ER deaths, but there was no response from the minister. So I will ask her now, will this government commit to conducting an inquiry into emergency room deaths?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for the question. So we certainly are committed to reviewing any time there is an unexpected outcome in our emergency rooms to ensure that we can always do better and look at how things are going. We have to expect that the most critically ill individuals in Nova Scotia present to hospital through our emergency rooms. We know that that happens due to complex illness, unexpected life-threatening illnesses, or accidents, Mr. Speaker. So we are going to continue to see a proportion of people who have unsuccessful outcomes, and that does not mean that our dedicated staff are not working and skilled and capable of providing life-saving care, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Sydney, Member 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we all know, government has made it a priority to consolidate power in the hands of the Premier and its ministers. As a direct result, we've seen this government act inappropriately. My question to the Minister of Economic Development: why is it that the government decided to compete against a private bidder to attempt to acquire the Lunenburg Foundry shipyard?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the member opposite for the question. The bid that was made for the property at the Lunenburg shipyard was made in the absence of knowing what other bids were being made at that time. At this point, as the person who's also the member for Lunenburg, so I have for sure concern, but also optimism, Mr. Speaker, because in meeting with proponents for offshore opportunities, it is back in the hands of the private sector, and we as government will look to a future role.
The Honourable Member for Sydney, Member 2.
Mr. Speaker, I'll take a stab at answering that question. It's because, as usual, the facility was tied to friends of the government. As usual, the entire thing fell apart with the slightest bit of scrutiny. Mr. Speaker, will the government conduct an independent investigation into the failed attempt to acquire the Lunenburg Foundry shipyard?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's far too early in the session for me to lose my zen. But the people of Lunenburg County in particular know how utterly ridiculous an allegation that is, that this was related to friends. This is a business with over a century of involvement, a linchpin service within the marine industrial sector on the South Shore. It was that concern for the provision of that service and frankly nothing else.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Basin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleagues and I have been urging the government to take action on power rates. Last year, the government declared mission accomplished on power rates. A government release trumpeted the Premier's PC's block NS Power's 12% rate hike. Well, Mr. Speaker, here we stand today with a 14% rate hike, with who knows how much to come in 2 years. I guess the government figured the 12% rate hike wasn't quite enough. Turns out the mission was not accomplished. I'd like to ask the Premier, how'd you get that so wrong?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources and Energy.
Renewables. Thank the member opposite for the question. It gives me an opportunity to stand up and talk about Bill 212. And actually, the UARB actually found that Bill 212 did its job. It reduced power rates. And as I said in the House last session, there were two phases of Bill 212. There was the non-fuel side, there was a fuel side. We capped what they could charge for their rates on the non-fuel side. I'd just like to remind the members of the House in Nova Scotia, there's been fuel adjustment rates for Nova Scotia Power rates for many years, long before this PC government took over. So we did protect the ratepayers, Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Bedford Basin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will say that the minister was clear on that, but the premier was not. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians can make neither heads nor tails of this government's energy policy. First, they claim they're stopping rate hikes. Now they say, suck it up, we just have to live with a hike. They oversold and they underdelivered. They say they're proponents of clean energy, and then they extend the lifespan of multiple coal plants. They say they're planning to meet our climate targets, but they're overseeing the stoppage or cancellation of almost every single renewable energy project in the province and forgiving 2.6 million tons of carbon emissions. Mr. Speaker, the windmills of this province must be generating a lot of juice with all the sucking and blowing this government is doing. So my question for the Premier...
Question, please. Question, please. And I'm going to ask that the member retract that statement.
So it doesn't mean what a lot of people think it means, but it does mean that they're saying one thing and doing something else. So my question for the Premier is, are there any other ways that he's planning to hike people's bills this session that he'd like to tell us about?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources and Renewables.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to remind Nova Scotians, we were the government that introduced green hydrogen to the process in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia is not the only province that's in the competition with green hydrogen, but we're certainly leading the pack, Mr. Speaker. We are putting in more megawatts of onshore wind. We announced 5 gigawatts of offshore wind, Mr. Speaker. We're still working with the tidal power. We secured the solar program for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. To say we're sitting on our hands, that's pretty rich, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier and his government meddled in an independent process for Nova Scotia Power. As a result, the utility was downgraded, so it's going to cost them more money to get financing for any of these projects. And, Mr. Speaker, that means more costs on the backs of customers of Nova Scotia Power, which are Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. This government did not only not protect Nova Scotians from an increase in power rates, they made it worse for them, Mr. Speaker, and time will show that.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources and Renewables.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I said, this gives me an opportunity to talk about Bill 212. And Mr. Speaker, it was in the UARB's findings. Bill 212 from this PC government that was agreed on unanimously in this House did its job, Mr. Speaker, to protect ratepayers in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, it was found there that it would be double digits each year if it were not for this government.
Order, please. The time for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. I recognize the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In response to a question from the member for Dartmouth North, the minister had suggested that asked the member where she got the 80% vacancy. That was reported in the CBC in March 21st of this year, and I'll table that for the minister. So in fact, the member wasn't scaring Nova Scotians. She was speaking to the fact of the matter where in some hospitals in Nova Scotia, it's been reported that there's upwards of 80% vacancy rates for registered nurses, licensed practical nurses, and nurse practitioners in some hospitals.
That is not a point of order. It's just sharing of information. So I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That concludes government business for the day. I move that the House do rise to meet again on Wednesday, March 22nd, between the hours of 1 and 6. And tomorrow is Opposition Day, so I will turn it over to my honourable colleague, the Official Opposition House Leader.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So for Opposition Day tomorrow, the opposition will be calling Bills 257, Health Services and Insurance Act respecting glucose monitors, Bill 259, Income Tax Act to reduce income tax, and Bill 261, Revenue Act to suspend provincial motor fuel taxes.
The motion is that the House do rise to meet again on Wednesday, March 22nd, between the hours of 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. Will those in favour of the motion please indicate aye? Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. We stand adjourned until 1 p.m. on Wednesday. Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Before we do officially adjourn, I recognize the member for Dartmouth North on announcement. She already asked, and I said yes. So.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a reminder to any women members that we are meeting virtually tomorrow as the CWP, Commonwealth Women's Parliamentarians, to discuss a very exciting project that we want to put forward in the fall. You have the Zoom link. Cara Locke is helping us facilitate that. I hope you can make it if you're not at Public Accounts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we stand adjourned until 1 p.m. on Wednesday.